Former President Donald Trump took the stage at Manhattan's Madison Square Garden on Sunday night. A roster of high-profile Republicans made appearances as Trump laid out his closing argument to voters 9 days before the election.
This election is a choice between whether we will have 4 more years of gross incompetence and failure, or whether we will begin the 4 greatest years in the history of our country.
But the rally was overshadowed by incendiary rhetoric made by a number of guest speakers. Joining me now is the Hill's congressional reporter, Mychael Schnell, to discuss Trump's Madison Square Garden rally and more around Washington and the campaign trail. Mychael, as always, it's great to see you. Look, this Trump rally, closing arguments normally made to not only excite the base, but also win over undecided voters. But did this do anything to win over undecided voters?
Well, I was going to say, I think it surely excited the base.
Yeah.
This is the bait, the red meat that former President Trump has been feeding his base for years now, and it has clearly been working. But your second question, did it win over those moderates, those disenchanted Republicans, some folks who were on the fence about supporting former President Trump? I don't think so. This was more of the same that we've seen in recent weeks, but amped up even that rhetoric that we heard from the former president, whether it was talking about his political opponents, talking about the enemies, talking about Vice President Kamala Harris, and also some of those speakers who spoke before the former president, particularly that comedian who made that incendiary, what they called a joke about Puerto Rico that has really taken fire online. I don't think that this was effective in terms of the former president winning over new voters, but exciting his base and the folks who already love him, sure, it was effective in that way.
Yeah, and his campaign clearly putting a lot of stock into, exciting their base. The choice of Madison Square Garden, I think, got a lot of eyeballs, people raising their eyebrows thinking, Trump's going to deep blue Manhattan. But we know that a number of competitive House races are, surrounding Manhattan. You're from the area, you know that well. And at one point, former President Trump made a bit of a nod to Speaker Mike Johnson. Talk more about that.
Yeah, he said that he likes Mike Johnson. He thinks that Mike Johnson will be around for some time, which is extremely significant because Speaker Johnson has made it very clear that he wants to continue leading the House Republican Conference next year in the capacity of Speaker. Now, that's the main question here. Will Johnson be able to hold on to the gavel? A bunch of different variables are here. A, do Republicans even win the House? That's an open question right now. It's pretty much a toss-up in terms of who's going to control the House next year. B, does Johnson have enough support that overtakes those detractors in order to keep hold of the gavel? Right now, if it's just about 4 seats, as is the majority right now, it's going to be difficult because Johnson has a number of vocal critics, some people who are already saying they won't vote for him. I spoke to Congressman Tom Massey before Congress left for recess. He told me he's not voting for Johnson under hell or high water. He has a lot of fierce critics. Now, if former President Trump supports Johnson and Trump is incoming to the White House and that House majority is larger than the razor-thin one they have right now, Johnson has a chance of holding on. But if not, it's all an open question. So that all goes to say former President Trump's endorsement of the Speaker last night, absolutely helpful, but not the end of the story in terms of who's going to control the House next year.
Yeah, this all goes to say that this isn't, I guess the craziness of the news cycle is not necessarily over on November 6th. There's a whole other round of challenges.
Starts the whole next story of 2024.
Exactly. So back to the rally, a number of major names there, RFK Jr., Elon Musk, Dr. Phil, the list goes on. But interestingly enough, Melania Trump, the former First Lady, introduced her husband. Now, she's on the campaign trail, but not that much. This was a pretty rare appearance. Look, why was it important for the campaign to have her there in the first place?
Well, I think that when we're in the final stretch, they want to show this unanimity of the ticket. I can't say that word properly. The cohesiveness of the ticket, which includes the spouses. We've seen Usha Vance be with J.D. Vance on the trail. So I think that there are also a lot of questions about, Melania Trump has been such a fascinating political figure. The clothing that she has worn to tell messages, the book that she has written, the reporting about her. She's been sort of this fascinating figure in our current modern day political atmosphere. So I think a lot of folks are sometimes wondering about her. And so to see her out there on stage introducing her husband, the former president, the right now Republican nominee, notable fascinating. We'll see if it changed any minds in the lead off to this election. Probably not, but a fascinating image up there.
Definitely. Sort of when you bring your spouse out, it maybe softens an image of a candidate in some way. I want to move to Democratic reaction. We talked about it at the beginning of the segment, but vice presidential candidate on the Democratic side, Governor Tim Walz, likened the rally at Madison Square Garden to a 1939 pro-Nazi event. What has been the overall reaction from the left? I mean, it seems that they have certainly taken this and ran with it in many ways.
Plenty of criticism.
Right.
We have seen a lot of criticism. Republicans, former President Trump getting his fair share of criticism this morning. I want to note, though, that it's not all Democrats.
Yeah.
We did see a number of Republican members of Congress, Congresswoman Maria Elvia Salazar, Congressman Anthony Diaz-Esposito, push back on that joke that was made by the comedian. And, some would say that was just that was the comedian at the rally, but it was an introductory speaker at the rally. This was all part of the former president's rally, which is why it's all being included in this conversation. There's been some Republican pushback, even from the Trump campaign himself, with one of their spokespeople saying that they do not associate themselves with that joke made by that comedian. So there has been criticism on both sides of the aisle, particularly from Democrats, some very sharp, pointed criticism. And of course, this all comes as we are in this final stretch to Election Day, nearly 1 week away. Both sides of the campaign are going to try to capitalize on anything they can, and absolutely Democrats are going to run with this.
Yeah, and we'll get more on that reaction on the comments made about Puerto Ricans from our colleague Rafael Bernal later on in the show. But I want to go and take a look at the polls. It seems like over the past few weeks, Democrats have been raising the alarm over Donald Trump's closing of the gap in these polls. It's very important to note this is still within the margin of error. They're still very close. This could go either way. But Democratic Party strategists seem to be hoping that a wave of so-called ghost voters will turn out. Tell us more about this.
Yeah, that's right. So there are some Democratic strategists who are saying that they're hoping that there are some of these ghost voters, young female voters, who may not be in the mix when you're looking at these polls. They may not be folks that are reachable by polling, or just folks who aren't typically spoken to when pollsters are going through and making these surveys, but people who are going to come out strongly in droves for Vice President Kamala Harris. Look, it's a little bit of a gamble. I think it comes, as we know, from 2016, 2020. Donald Trump is sometimes his support, and the amount of support he has is sometimes understated in these polls. So Democrats want to prepare for that, and they are trying to come back and say, well, our numbers are understated in these polls too, because there are some of these ghost voters, people who will come out and support Kamala Harris. It's interesting because it's with those young female voters, but this is also sort of a message that we've heard from Congresswoman Liz Cheney.
Yeah.
We heard her say at a recent campaign event alongside the vice president, nobody has to know if you vote for Kamala Harris. You don't have to tell your Republican friends that you voted for this individual. Your vote is your own business, and you're the only person who's going to know that. So will there be a significant number of Republicans who come out and silently vote for Vice President Kamala Harris? We'll have to see, but clearly there are some hopes that there are some movements behind the scenes in terms of folks who come out to vote, even though they're not vocally in support.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that narrative about young women. We know that over the past few weeks, it's been about young men, and Harris sort of eroding that support. So certainly another very important voting bloc. Look, we're 8 days out from Election Day. On Tuesday night, Kamala Harris will be speaking at the Ellipse, the site of former President Trump's January 6th speech. We know that Trump will be making a number of stops across the battleground state map. So where can we expect the campaigns to focus their energy, and where should they focus their energy?
I think that they're all going to try to make gains and pick up on these independent voters, some of these moderate voters. For Donald Trump, it's folks who are concerned about the economy, immigration, people who may be traditionally Democratic voters but are fed up with the past 4 years. And for Vice President Harris, it's going to be some of those disenchanted Republicans, people who have been Republican and conservative for all their life, but they were turned off by Donald Trump because of what happened on January 6th, and they just simply can't see themselves casting another vote for them. That is what's going to make or break this election. We have seen in all of the national surveys, the battleground state polls, that this election is so close. It doesn't matter how you look at it. It doesn't matter what barometer you're using. It is close in every single way. So Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are going to want to try to secure as many of those undecided voters as they possibly can, wanting to leave no stone unturned, as you mentioned, as they head into this final stretch.
So we talk about how close the national presidential election is, but at the Senate level, it's a different story. The majority is obviously hanging in the balance, but Republicans feeling very optimistic, particularly about deep red Montana, where Tim Sheehy, the Republican candidate, is looking to oust incumbent Senator Jon Tester. But we know that Democrats have been hammering Sheehy over his military record, which is under increased scrutiny. They're pointing to reports of a bullet wound he claims to have received in Afghanistan. It's important to point out that Sheehy is ahead by 4 points in this race, but with the questions about military record and service, which we see playing out in House races, as well as at the presidential race between the two vice presidential candidates, could this be a lot of damage to Sheehy, or is he sort of in the clear at this point?
So I think that the main thing here is it doesn't help. Right. Yeah. Anytime you have a controversy about your military record, about a situation where you embellished a story and need to come back and clean it up, it doesn't ever help. But will it hurt him enough that Tim Sheehy will go down in the polls in such a way that he could end up losing this race? Probably not, right? It would have to be a pretty significant decrease for Jon Tester to be able to pick up that much gain. As you mentioned, it's 4 points right now. Some polls have had him more, some polls have had him less. But this Montana seat is really one of the Republicans' top pickup opportunities. So what the question is right now is, will this story, this scandal, be enough to put Jon Tester over Tim Sheehy? Probably not, but again, it could narrow that gap between the two.
Absolutely. Certainly both campaigns across the board doing everything they can in this last final week before the election day. Mychael, Schnell, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Julia.
Turning from one swing state to another, Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner is suing Elon Musk after the billionaire's Super PAC promised a chance at a $1 million giveaway to registered voters in Pennsylvania who signed his petition. The suit aims to block the giveaway, arguing that it is operating as an illegal, unregulated lottery. It comes after the Justice Department sent letters to Musk's America PAC last week, warning it may also violate federal law. Under federal law, it is illegal to pay someone to vote. Musk, however, says his PAC isn't paying people to register. Instead, he argues the giveaways are to encourage petition signatures. And we'll be right back with more of your Daily Debrief.